Welcome to week 2 of Musical Conversations. We just wrapped up the first week of the festival, our unforgettable return to performances with live audiences. The most heartbreaking part of not being able to have live concerts last summer was that we missed out on celebrating David Shifrin's 40th and final summer as our artistic director. So week 2 of our festival is devoted to celebrating David Shifrin's artistry. He'll be part of 2 big world premieres this week, a clarinet chamber concerto by David Ludwig and a chamber opera by Marc Neikrug. The opera is called A Song by Mahler, and it is for clarinet, string quartet, and 2 singers. It is one of the biggest commissioning projects in the chamber music world in recent years. We partnered with the La Jolla, Santa Fe, and Lake Champlain Chamber Music Festivals and the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center. David Shifrin will, of course, forever be the godfather of Chamber Music Northwest, and we're looking forward so much to this week of celebration. You're now Artistic Director Emeritus.
Oh.
So it feels like you're coming to Chamber Music Northwest as a civilian now.
A civilian.
Yeah. It's like an ex-president. But I mean, does it feel different at all as a performer? Does it feel different?
Well, you have to ask me again next week, right? In a few days. You know, I feel like I have a little more time to devote to practicing, especially with 2 premieres this week. So that part feels rather liberating.
One of the 2 premieres that you mentioned is going to be a chamber opera by Marc Neikrug called A Song by Mahler, and it's for clarinet and string quartet and 2 singers. And are you able to get a sense yet? I know you haven't had a first rehearsal yet. Are you able to get a sense of what it sounds like?
Well, just from looking at the score and practicing the clarinet part and listening to recordings of the actual Mahler song on which it's based, which is kind of the signature song of the protagonist of the entire opera, a mezzo-soprano who is dealing with memory loss and dementia and uses it to hang on to memory, the closeness and the relationship that she has with this song by Mahler. It's a wonderful opportunity for Marc's artistry and for this unusual format of an opera, a real chamber opera with a chamber music group of 5 players and 2 singers, to have life breathed into it and to have performances in multiple locations. It looks to be really beautiful. I'm delighted that the clarinet is included, and I even get a chance to play the song early on in the opera and be criticized by the character who actually sings it. I was reading the libretto and found that to be very realistic, in fact.
And just so the audience can visualize, do you know where the ensemble is going to be on the stage and where the singer?
Oh, I'm waiting for the first staging rehearsal to find out where my place is in this scenario. And you know, there are going to be sets and staging by Doug Fitch, who is a renowned director and designer, and Marc recruited him early on, and we haven't begun yet to set all that up. So I can't wait to see how all the music comes together and how all the visuals will come together in just a few days. I mean, I've seen photos of his imagined sets, but I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to fit into those and how it's going to all work. So the audience can discover that with us, because Chamber Music Northwest, it will be the real world premiere, the very first performance before we go on and do it at all of these other festivals.
I mean, I find world premieres in general to be just about the most exciting thing that we can do as performers, right?
Indeed, something great that never existed before, except in Marc's mind, and then on his computer and his pen, and then in the designer and the musicians practicing it. But our audience and Chamber Music Northwest will get to experience the full force of it for the very first time.
And so the other work that you're premiering is by David Ludwig, composer. It's a concerto for clarinet and a sinfonietta size ensemble. I believe 13 other instruments, called Les Adieux. By the way, both of these were supposed to be premiered last summer, right? And they were
right. We're on a delay, a COVID delay. So glad that we're getting to do it finally.
Yeah. So it's a 3-movement work, somewhat like a standard concerto, would you say?
Somewhat, but I would say that the difference is that the middle movement is a kind of an arioso, a slow lament, but it's more of an improvisation and like an accompanied cadenza that is based on a prayer, like a cantorial Jewish service, which is something I can kind of relate to and enjoy playing. And there are certain free sections that are somewhat improvisatory, but it's all within a very clear structure. And I got a sneak preview of this a year ago when we knew that the concerto could not happen live at Chamber Music Northwest for the premiere. David Ludwig was kind enough to write a solo piece for me that I recorded and that we posted on one of our live, quasi-live video concerts for our virtual season last year. And a lot of that music has been reworked and added to the full complement of the ensemble for the middle movement of this concerto. I think it's a wonderful genre to have a concerto that is in the grand style of the earliest concertos were not for enormous orchestras, but for a solo violin or a keyboard with a small group of players, sometimes played without conductors, sometimes led by the soloist. In this case, we have the wonderful Earl Lee conducting, which I think will really help us find the unified approach to the piece. We've already had rehearsals for the concerto with David Ludwig and Earl and myself on Zoom, where we've talked it through, and then I've recorded various things and sent it to both of them and gotten feedback and criticism back. So this is already a work that we've begun the collaborative process.
Another pandemic era phenomenon, a Zoom rehearsal.
Yeah.
But that, I have to say, there's, of course, we can't really play together on Zoom, but that ability to, I imagine you played for them?
I did a little bit, and then after we finished the Zoom call, I recorded and then sent the recordings, a couple of them, and then got feedback from the recordings. And so there'll probably be more of that before we actually come together and play with the whole group next week.
You've been just so gracious, the most incredible mentor for me and for Gloria. And we have you on speed dial. We've had you on speed dial all year, and just so generous. but what does it feel like? Is it a little bit like sending your children off into the world?
Well, I think everybody's well prepared for the transition. Chamber Music Northwest, and I made the plan for the transition 6 years before it happened. We set the date as 2020, and the search started 2 years before the transition. And of course, they came up with fantastic choice of you and Gloria. And I was prepared for the transition and actually set the date myself, and was just delighted at how carefully and thoughtfully it was handled. And so now coming back to play is something that's very familiar to me. That's how I started at Chamber Music Northwest, as clarinetist in the ensemble 44 years ago. and my experience in many other festivals and concert series where I just go and play the clarinet. And so it's going to be fantastic to have that experience again at Chamber Music Northwest after all these years.
Even if you had never been director of anything in your life, just your artistry as a clarinetist and as a teacher, I mean, it's just changed the world. I mean, it's just transformed not just a generation, but generations, I think, of music making and of clarinetists, and of a way of playing beautifully. But you've happened to be director of a lot of things, and not the least of which are of being Chamber Music Northwest and Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center. But what are you proudest of having accomplished through the organizations that you've led?
Oh, David Finkel asked me the same question in an interview, and what really just came to mind was survival, because the world is constantly changing. Expectations, challenges are not always the same, and just I'm proudest of keeping focus on what meant the most to me, and what I thought was most important was keeping the music alive, striving for the very best quality of performances, trying to be true to the composers whose music we play, and, as I said, survival of the organizations, of the art form through difficult times. You never know what's around the next corner, do you, Soovin?
But those are all values that Gloria and I also hold dear, and no matter what happens around those corners, we'll need to be prepared for them. But I think these are all values that we have to maintain. So we promise you we will try.
Oh, you're already doing magnificently.
Marc Neikrug's A Song by Mahler is going to be staged and directed by Doug Fitch, who's a do-it-all creative artist with seemingly limitless imagination. I feel like if I single out any one project that Doug has done, it minimizes his countless other endeavors and other disciplines. So I leave it to you to explore his work on his website and elsewhere on the internet. We got to catch up with him just as he was entering Call Auditorium on the Reed College campus for the first time. Are you designing for a space?
You mean for this prediction?
Well,
In this
yes,
particular
in this
production.
case, you knew it's traveling to different places.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
It's one of the really amazing, difficult, complicated challenges. I mean, it was very hard to understand what were the actual parameters of this project. And so it's like, well, can we hang a scrim? And then it's like, yeah, of course we can hang a scrim. And then I looked around and it's like, There's nothing to hang it to. So we can't hang anything. Can we have lighting? Well, if you bring it, maybe we'll have it, then we better make it into the set. So that's when I brought Nick in, like sort of thinking, well, we better design this kind of together so that it has all the capabilities that it possibly can. So then the most important thing is that it fits into a single crate. So then I said, well, what's a crate that can unfold? And that's where we came up with the bench. And the bench is a bed and a seat and a waiting room, and it's all these kinds of things. But then in order to make it function that way, aesthetically, it can't really look like any one of those things any more than it suggests any of those things, all of those things. So that's why it's incredibly minimalistic and fluorescent yellow-green. So you know instantly it's not supposed to be any of the things specifically that it is, but it could be anything. So that's why. Sort of a line that frames all sorts of potential possibilities.
So we have only a few days before the
Really?
performance, right?
I'm kidding.
I'm not on his wavelength yet.
This is such an unusual world premiere just because it was supposed to happen over a year ago. And so everything that was building up to that, of course, got extended into this entire long process that made it different than other openings, but also that I thought it was a kind of a wonderful thing to be able to sort of just take new quality of time that you never ever have, to slow down the process and sort of say, well, that, the deadline was like next week and now it's next year. so and then you just get to say, well, then am I doing the right thing? Maybe that we can subjugate these ideas once again to a little broader, let them sit. One of the things that happened, for example, was as I was building the set out of wood under pressure, thinking like that was going to need, I realized that the wood was the wrong material to build the set out of, and I suddenly kind of, oh dear, what am I going to do? And it should be built out of aluminum for every reason. I just don't tend to build things out of aluminum, so I had to get a new budget, and they were very kind and very supportive, and we just then spent the next 3 months rebuilding the entire thing out of aluminum. But as far as working with Marc, I mean, I don't believe I've ever done an actual world premiere with Marc before, but I've done a few of his pieces. Marc has this quality that makes it seem like everything is just cool. It's maybe part of his Santa Fe, being in Santa Fe, I don't know, but he just is that way. Other people aren't that way. Other people are terrified for no good reason. So he's not that kind of person. And he also is very interested in what the other people in the collaboration have to bring to it. So he'll say like, well, this should happen in a room in the house. And you sort of say, well, is there some other feeling to the room? And said, I don't know, maybe that's sort of, you tell me. And I said, would it be a room with an aquarium? Oh, I didn't think of an aquarium. Yeah, maybe it has an aquarium. Could the aquarium come to life? Maybe the fish come out of the aquarium. That is, well, oh, maybe that's what it is. Yeah. And so there's like, okay, it's this parallel generative process, I think. It's been a piece where once all the elements were in place that Marc had, as Marc had imagined them, then I was able to start to invent a single set that didn't have moving parts really. At one point I was going to have a revolving door, and it seemed very simple originally, and then it just kept getting simpler and simpler and simpler because the parameters for a traveling chamber opera with a small budget are pretty extreme. So that became like an interesting challenge. Not, it wasn't like, well, this is not worth doing because it's just too hard to work that kind of budget. It's actually interesting to have those kinds of challenges and to figure out how they will inform a storytelling object. When I guess when people walk in, they will be looking at a stage that looks like a little concert chamber shell, and on that stage is a kind of a single line of fluorescent yellow that is delineating kind of a doorway, a circle, sort of a window, a few things. And my intention, we'll see how it works, is that throughout the evening, that little line becomes a division, stands in for the division of many, many things, reality, non-reality, interior, exterior, the threshold into a different window of time, like a time warp, a realization, stepping over a threshold, people call that, where you're recognizing that, in fact, whereas you thought you were normal before, now it's a new normal, which is a perfect time to reconsider those kind of questions. I don't know why we ever got this word normal anyway, and whoever can define it is good for you. It doesn't really mean anything. And if you think about it, the word art is like that too. It's one of those words that just keeps, its meaning just keeps changing. But it's a one man and a woman, and there's a division between their psychologies and their psychiatry, their psychological states of mind, for sure. One of them's watching the other kind of mentally decompose in a way, and the other one is wondering whether she is. So visually, the intention, always with set design, and why it's an interesting project, is you're trying to find a metaphor, trying to invent some sort of visual metaphor that can be adaptive for all of these different situations. So it looks like it's transforming all the time, but it might not be at all. It might be just your mind that making it transform.
And where's the string quartet and clarinet in this?
So they are on one side of this line. They're upstage of the line, and we will see them the whole time. So the presence of their presence, physical presence, is important to the storytelling, because the way in which music is used in this is very conscious decisions about. It's unusual too, because we were calling it an opera. I mean, I don't know what an opera really is. It's, I guess people generally sing. But they also do that in a musical comedy, and we don't call that an opera. So in this case, they're singing and they're also speaking, and sometimes the instruments are speaking in a way, and sometimes they're just taking care of the emotional state, right? So people might be speaking, and then in the opera world, you're always wondering, or at least you should, if you're writing an opera, you should be asking the question, why are the people singing? And if you haven't got a good answer for that, you shouldn't be writing an opera. But in this case, I think what's so wonderful is that they're singing because they're singers. And she's singing a song that was written by Mahler. So it's sort of a meta story about a singer tapping into her own understanding of what music means to her and to them.
Composer David Ludwig was just recently named the Dean and Director of the Juilliard School in New York, after serving for many years as a faculty member at the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia. David happens to be the composer I've worked the most with, and it's still always so enlightening for me to talk about almost anything with him. He talks here about his concerto for David Shifrin called Les Adieux, the Farewells.
The piece is called Les Adieux, and it was written originally for to commemorate David's 40th year and final year as Artistic Director of Chamber Music Northwest. And also it was a Beethoven year, and so I was inspired by Beethoven's piano sonata Les Adieux, because it is a story of someone who leaves a place, and then there's an absence, and then that person returns, as David was doing. So the best laid plans, right? What's the expression? Something like humans plan and God laughs. So, um, you know, COVID hit and everything got pushed back. And I'm just really grateful that it's coming together. I think it's an incredible testament to what you're doing there. And, making sure music happens is a really important part of coming back from this pandemic. So that's the piece. I'm happy to tell you more about it.
So it's for clarinet and 13 other instruments.
That's right.
Sort of sinfonietta instrumentation, which is like a small orchestra, just one on a part instead of having multiple string players on multiple violinists, for instance, but it has percussion and winds and woodwinds and brass. And is this an instrumentation that David Shifrin asked for, or is it something that you came up with?
I came up with it. With writing a concerto for a wind instrument, you'd never want an orchestra to be too heavy. But this is also a very standard kind of new music ensemble instrumentation. And I'm actually reminded of the flu of 1918. After that, there were a lot of pieces written for ensembles of this size as people were kind of stitching back together. So that's more of a coincidence than anything else. Is an opportunity to write for a chamber orchestra, and using this sinfonietta, which allows really every kind of color and fullness of sound.
I know that if I were a composer, which I'm not, but it seems like it would be an exciting talent to have, but it would also be slightly nerve-wracking to hear the piece for the first time, right? Maybe in most cases at the first rehearsal. What is that experience like for you?
I think for most any composer, it's difficult. And I think in my younger, less experienced days, I kind of didn't know what to do with myself hearing a piece for the first time. I mean, it goes from that kind of two-dimensional space that's been inside of your brain and your inner ear and thoughts into the world, and people are interpreting, and the time just goes by so quickly, and suddenly you're hearing all these instruments, and it's also incredibly exciting. So I think the word is overwhelming, and but there are difficult things because things come out that you didn't intend, that you want to change, or that don't work. And most of the time, especially dealing with musicians at this level, almost all the time, that's on me as the composer. So this is why we have rehearsal and to workshop things. But it's incredible. It's probably similar to if a playwright, the first time they hear their play read by actors in front of them, it's an amazing thing. Maybe the filmmaker, the first time they see the film on the big screen. So much goes into it. We compose in a kind of slow motion as we, today I wrote 10 seconds of music. Wow. So by the end of the process, that first rehearsal is really an incredible experience. And it is, I think, unique. As a creative artist, it's a unique experience to have. When you've premiered pieces and because you've done so much, Soovin, what's that like playing for the composer the first time?
Also can be nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I wondered.
It depends. Now, in our case, you and I, we've had a long relationship where I've gotten to play many pieces for you, and so it's not that it's not that I know exactly what you're going to say or what to expect, but I do go into I guess in the learning of the piece on my own before the first rehearsal. I have context and I speak your language, or I'm a little bit more familiar with it. But sure, you desperately want the composer to be happy. We don't want the composer to be upset at how we're playing it. But I was going to ask you that question also. Has it ever happened that you hear a piece, whether it's for the first time or even for the 10th time played by somebody else, and you just don't really recognize your piece?
I don't know if it's ever quite been that extreme, but there are times you hear it and you think, wow. I mean, I've been very fortunate because I've had really terrific people playing my music for the most part. I mean, for my whole life. But I would imagine it would be very jarring to hear your piece kind of played in a less attentive way than or uh, this is all just it's part of growing as an artist, though, and having these experiences. I mean, in a way, there are no bad experiences for an artist in this kind of transaction, because all of them are opportunities to learn. And when I have written something and it just kind of train wrecks happen, again, sometimes that's on me, and I realize, I should have maybe written that differently, and I'll go ahead and try to patch something up and go to the performers who are the best teachers and say, how should that look? What should that be like on the page? So, I've learned more working with you and I loved my teachers and learned so much from them, but I've learned as much or more working with you than any teacher I ever had. And, all composers should be so lucky to have productive relationships like that with friends and colleagues who play their music.
Composer John Harbison once said to me when I was playing a piece for him, and afterwards he looked at us and he said, I didn't imagine the piece would or could sound like that at all. It was different character. I think maybe the tempo was completely different from what he conceived. But then he admitted, he said, this happens every once in a while where I'll hear it and I like it even better when it's played in a way that I didn't conceive at all. Have you ever had that experience?
Every single time. Every time. And I'll go back to that analogy of the playwright, who writes their play, and an actor says the lines maybe differently than the playwright had conceived of them. And the person who wrote it thinks, wow, playwright thinks, wow, that's so much better, or maybe the actor uses different words or makes a mistake. That's happened certainly in my music where a mistake has happened. I think, oh, I like that much more, something's too fast or too slow according to the tempo I wrote. But then again, it's in the three-dimensional space, and suddenly, I hear it's being played much faster, and I wrote it just because, someone didn't check a metronome before, whatever it is. And I think, no, keep that. There have been wrong notes I've preferred, and, so that it's all part of the process, but it's also part of the magic of it, the spontaneity of creating and collaborating together, is that sometimes there's some very happy accidents.
So the moral of this story is I don't need to be as diligent, and I shouldn't sweat the wrong notes because they might even be better.
What, Soovin, play whatever you want because it's going to be terrific. And I'll just draw smiley faces. No, but that, of course, that the magic of that collaboration happens because you're such a diligent musician, because you have committed so much of your work to the piece. And I know David is the same way as a clarinetist. Because of that, it gives them the freedom, the discipline and the commitment give us the freedom to then collaborate and have a musical conversation together.
And our final guest today is flutist Tara Helen O'Connor, a longtime favorite of Chamber Music Northwest audiences for nearly 20 years. She'll give our third world premiere of the week, a piece called Vesper Flight for flute and piano, composed by Portland's very own Kenji Bunch. Tara tells us about Vespers, and the absurd life as a flutist during COVID.
I'm so excited about this piece. I met Kenji Bunch actually really in person and got to work with him at Chamber Music Northwest a number of years ago when we premiered his piece Ralph's Old Records. And that was such a fun piece. It's a Pierrot quintet, so that's flute, clarinet, viola in this case, with a little bit of violin, cello, and piano. And it was really the story about Kenji's father, Ralph, and his father was in attendance at the premiere. And it was so neat to hear I think it was like 5 or 6 movements of the piece, and like throughout these tunes through his life, and captured really the essence of these records that his father used to play for him when he was growing up. And it was such a memorable time for me, and just watching also the relationship that Kenji has with his father, which was just so beautiful. When I lost my parents in very quick succession a number of years ago, I wanted to do something to really honor their memory. And I thought one of the best ways to honor someone's memory or to celebrate, a big event in your life, like an anniversary or a graduation or an engagement, is to actually commission a composer to write a piece, because that is the way of giving a gift forward and immortalizing your loved one, really just giving this gift to the world that lasts long beyond you or them. So I commissioned Kenji to write this piece, and I got in line and I was very excited. And then finally, COVID happened, and then other stuff happened. And then Kenji got around to writing the piece, and he had just lost his father. So through this piece, we sort of share this powerful and deeply profound grief through this process, which is interesting. So it's called Vesper Flight. And Kenji says that it is inspired by the nighttime habits of swifts, these birds that never seem to land. And it's a kind of parable, it's a kind of parable for the process of grief and lightening the loads that we all carry. So the piece is for flute and piano, and it's very, very beautiful and very magical. And if you know anything about swifts, or you don't know anything about these birds, you need to actually just look up a few facts, because the facts are kind of astounding. They fly like 100 miles an hour. They're so fast. They never seem to land, which is how you imagine souls transcending, also never land. And then you think about vespers and evening prayers and all of that. So it has all of these like beautiful meanings rolled up into this beautiful 10-minute piece. And this is another fun fact that I learned, was they tagged a swift at when he was much younger, and then they picked up the bird again 16 years later with the same tag on it, which is a really long time for birds. Birds don't usually live that long, and swifts live a little longer than other birds do. But they had figured out that this bird, by doing the math and looking at the migratory patterns of the birds, they figured out this particular bird probably flew 4 million miles in his life, and was or her life, or their life. And it's like 8 times to the moon and back, which is really astounding when you think about it. So the birds are really, really cool, and you'll hear bird song in this piece, and these beautiful melodies, and it's very touching and very meaningful for me to play it, especially at CMNW.
Life during the pandemic as a flutist was probably different from my experience as a violinist. I mean, I remember early on, everybody was just kind of terrified about wind players when they were talking about orchestras playing, and so what has been your experience?
Well, initially it was horrifying. I'm really not going to lie. I thought, this horrible disease that affects your breathing, and then also the droplets and the studies in Colorado that came out with the flute and the singers and the winds and oh no. And I thought, like, how are we going to get back? How is this ever going to be okay? And as living in New York City was really interesting too, because here we are like at the front lines of the pandemic when it first started in this country, and near front lines anyway. The West Coast was first, and then New York was really bad, and I couldn't imagine a way back. And so I actually started doing a lot of other things, like recording at home and making videos. And I remember doing this Bois Mathieu 5-flute thing, recording it at home, and then going in the Soldiers Memorial and making 5 of myself in this video with buses driving through me on the street. And you can see this, it's on YouTube, it's hilarious. But I thought, well, if no one's going to play with me, I'm just going to have to go outside and play quintets with myself in the street, So I did that. And then with my students, because I have a lot of students, the big thing for the wind players was about community. How do we get back to our community? Because as musicians, we're group oriented. We play together. We like to eat together. We like to hang out. And I just didn't know how it was going to work. So with my students, what I wound up doing was I commissioned actually 21 composers at my schools and recorded videos and recordings at home with the students and putting them all together and layering them. My quintet did 13 2-minute premieres at MSM with 13 different composers. And we were able to, in the process, do 34 premieres on social media. And it was kind of a real way of having the students learning how to work together, how to play together while they were apart, because when school started, nobody was in orchestra yet. And the strings were playing because they could be masked. Then we did the whole mask thing. And that was insanely ridiculous because that doesn't work. And then the vaccine happened. But I have to tell you that throughout it, I actually did some studio work. I played on a record, the OK Human record for Weezer, the band Weezer. That I did that back in August when things were sort of mellow before they hit high again. But I remember also sitting in a group with 4 of the wind players being 30 feet apart. And that also presents as challenges too, trying to play together because sound travels differently than, so it was really a fascinating process, but I'm so glad to be back. And then, going back in and getting tested and playing before the vaccine was ready, and then testing negative every day and going to my work and then coming home and testing and quarantining and doing all of that. It was insane. But I'm actually really happy now to be around people who, that I can play with that trust me to be vaccinated and not have to wear a mask, and it's a relief actually.
There were no stories or proof, right, that I heard that wind players or people who are around wind players were getting COVID transmitted more easily than string players.
No, but you know what it's about? It's about the aerosols and droplets, right? So with flute, and the thing about flute, it looks like it's a real. I talk to my colleagues about this all the time because they're wind players. I'm like, what are we gonna do? How is this possible? And then my friend said, the bassoon. You blow into the bassoon, it's like a fountain of air. It all comes out the keys, and because instruments that are under more pressure, like the oboe, you have everything is sealed at the lip, right? But then it comes out of the bottom of the instrument quicker. Whereas flute is all huff and puff at the beginning, and then it's just hey. It just kind of all falls. So by putting us further apart and then putting these plexiglass screens, which I think are just I don't know, just dens of bacteria. I have no idea, but I think that's not a good idea. And so it's we'd be putting people in boxes trying to play, and it's just ridiculous. We learn so much, but we still don't know anything.
You mentioned mask, playing with masks. Is that what you said? What is the flute mask? How does that work?
Okay, so flute mask has these ridiculous. There's one that's actually basically a burlap sack that my friend put on. It was like a Donald Duck bill that came out this far, and he put it in. And I was just crying on FaceTime because we were, and he's trying to get this flute. You try to thread the flute through this hole, and then all the air. Okay, imagine this. Imagine blowing into a sack that's capturing all this air, but it's getting hot and you can't even imagine the sweat and the yuck, and then you're trying to, but air's still coming out of the bottom of the instrument, right? But the big fall off here is that, and then I have another one that I clip onto the flute with a guard that I would wear that would just capture the air here. And then my friend said, what about the air under here? And they're it's going on my, I don't know. And then there's another one that I had that I was prepared practicing in actually, and I spent a lot of time practicing in masks. You can't articulate really well in them because, and then you inhale and then mask goes into your mouth, and it's just, it's a disaster. And then my favorite was the students, some of them at school were like, okay, I'm wearing my mask, but they put the mask on. There was a giant hole cut out like a clown, and they put the flute up to I'm like, what? Why am I seeing your lips? I don't understand that. They say we have to wear a mask, but we can cut a hole in them. I'm like, oh God, no. It was amazing. I mean, amazing. And then my favorite thing was the flute sock. It's like a little like ped for your when you want to wear your sneakers but you don't want false. And you stick it on the end of the flute, and it's like this little, it's like a quarter, and it's supposed to stop the air from going out the bottom. I don't know.
I'm almost tempted to have a flute choir concert with masks just so we can all experience one.
Well, but then one other horror of this whole thing is not only, okay, so you've got the mask on, and then some people are more concerned about the flute, so then you put the flute into a bag. So now you basically have a bolt of fabric strapped to your face, and then so you thread your hands through this bag. And if you have to make a quick entrance, you're basically frozen like this for, if your piece is 45 minutes, you can't really take everything out and get your hands out because you can't maneuver because the instrument's inside a bag. It's hilarious.
Well, the good news is that we are an entirely vaccinated group of musicians here this year at Chamber of the Northwest, and we are going to be a very tight work group together, and so no flute masks, no bags, no burlap sacks.
Thank you. So excited. No burlap, no duck bills.
We want to hear you.
That would be nice. Actually, I sat through juries at one of my schools, and hearing a singer trying to sing through a mask was also just like, I mean, we work really hard as it is, but can you imagine trying to get your sound through fabric? I mean, that's the thing, right? You can't, and you couldn't see the expression on the face. You couldn't just see eyes and like the forehead wrinkles for emotion, but you see nothing else. It's really, you don't really realize what you miss until you don't have it. That's the thing. And that was the horror, like not being able to create together, and then also creating together, but not being able to really see and to feel.
Thank you for joining us for week 2 of Musical Conversations. We look forward to performing for you online and in the concert hall all week.